Peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul.
Here's our 2017 report from what we're going to do, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at a few different areas. We're going to look at travel, just kind of give you an idea of what it takes to get there. Now remember, what it takes to get there is what it takes to get back home, so we'll talk about that too. We're going to talk about 3 different congregations that we worked with this year. We're going to talk about the Jurong Church of Christ in Singapore, the Lima Pen Church of Christ in Singapore, and then we're going to talk about the Commonwealth Congregation. Now all 3 of these names you should be at least somewhat familiar with in the previous trips. But we'll talk about those 3 congregations and what they're doing, what we were doing with them, and what we have opportunities in the future. We'll talk about the Four Seas College. This is the primary reason we go, to work with the Four Seas College, and we'll talk about that as we go. Then we're going to talk about a section called the value. Some people ask me, and I think I've been asked maybe 5 or 6 times this year, is it worth it? I think it is. And I want to explain to you why I believe it's worth it to do this. Then I want to talk to you about the future. There's a lot of future good that can be done, and I'll explain some of that to you as we go through this morning. So let's talk about travel. Well, I made Mark get up, and I don't know what time we got up. What time we get up, Mark? I beat him to his house, and I beat him up. But I made it to the Nashville airport, made it to my gate, and I was the only one there. And as time traveled, people caught up. You have to make your way from your gate after you go through the boarding process and then make your way down a long corridor till you finally make it onto your plane. And you'll sit in that plane for, 30 minutes maybe till they get everything ready, get everything loaded. And remember, a lot of crucial things are happening at this moment. Your luggage that you've entrusted them with has got to make it around the world. So you're hoping they get it on the right plane and get it to where you need to go. This is an image that was taken not 20 minutes or 5 minutes, I can't remember when it was, outside of Nashville. The plane was in its initial incline going up. I think we were traveling on this flight at 37,000 feet by the time it made it through. And this is what you're going to see for the next, this was a short flight. This was only 40 minutes. So for 40 minutes, this is what you'll see. 3 flights, Nashville to Atlanta, Atlanta to Tokyo, Tokyo to Singapore. You've got a 40-minute flight, a 14-hour and 30-minute flight, and then another 8 or 9-hour flight that you're going back to back as you go. The very first flight, you'll notice this on the right side of the screen, we are 7,000 miles, and this is Atlanta to Tokyo. So you're going to travel 7,000 miles in some 13 hours and 29 minutes by the time they calculated it here. And you'll keep on going. Here's your second flight. This is Tokyo to Singapore, and it is another 7-hour flight. I forgot the mileage. I didn't get an image of that. But just to travel to this side of the world is pretty impressive. Then when you get there, here's what you're going to ride on. You're going to either walk, you're going to ride in a taxi cab, or you're going to ride on a subway or a bus. Now, what do you see wrong with this picture? The mirror was taped on. I was sitting in that cab. No one likes to ride in the front because that's the first person to reach the scene of the crash. So I looked over in the mirror and I thought, this guy's experienced. And sure enough, he was. So you'll walk most of the places that you go. You'll see the crowds of people in this area. They're all coming at you. And then on your side is another group of people just as large, and you're all coming at them. So this has got to happen in 24 seconds. They've got timers on all the intersections, and that's how long you have to get across. So the travel's pretty fun. Now, this was a van in the Philippines. What I'm trying to do is show you that in our travels, we're safe. Yes, the taxi cab had a taped-on mirror, and that was a fun little joke for our week. But this is a van that I hire in the Philippines to take me from the airport to the hotel. I will not get a cab in the Philippines. It's just not something I'm going to do, not something anybody that I know that's over there does. Anytime that the members in the Philippines come pick me up to go to the congregation, from the hotel to the congregation, we will use what's called Uber. Not a big thing here, but internationally it's rather large, and basically it's a taxi that you can call on your cell phone. So the members all take care of that. So everywhere we go, we're safe. Here's a picture of the MRT. This is in Singapore, and anywhere you go, you'll ride a subway. Matter of fact, I don't have my wallet with me right now, but I still have my card. And you have a little card that you've got to scan, and that gets you in and gets you back out. So everywhere we travel is pretty safe. I don't know if you noticed this. A lot of people where you travel. They say if you want to have a moment of privacy, just close your eyes, and you can have a nice moment of privacy. But here's what I want you to notice in the travel. There are millions of people in this area. Take the city of Metro Manila. I think there are 11 million people in that city.
That's more than New York City's metropolitan.
That's more than Pulaski, huh? You're not going to see this anywhere else in the world. Now, add this to the value of this work. There are millions of people just waiting on you and me. Let's talk about congregations. Now, we have to move fast, unfortunately. During this presentation, we don't have a lot of time. But let's talk about the congregations. This is the Jurong Church of Christ. Now, the Jurong Church of Christ is where the Four C's Bible College is located. It's a 3-story building. Ground floor 1 is the Chinese-speaking congregation and some offices. This is level 2 that you can see before you. This is the main auditorium. And then level 3 is where all of the school is held, the 2 classrooms for the first year and second year students, housing for the students, offices for the staff, and then a nice-sized library for them to be able to study in and do all their studies. So here's the 4 C's called. This is the Jurong building, and you can see the main floor, the second floor, and then in the back, if you look right back here, is the 3rd floor. It does not take up the entirety of the 3rd floor, but it does take up that, and that's where the school is located. And inside of this is what's interesting. You look at standing on the street and you're looking at the Jurong building. If you just do this and turn right, you're going to see this little image. What is this? Does anybody know? Right beside the Lord's church is a Chinese temple. So that's the kind of world you're talking about here. A world that believes in mystical gods. A world that believes, and this particular temple is a temple that offers ancestry worship. In other words, you go to worship your ancestors, your father, your mother, your grandfather, your grandmother, and so on down your family line in order to appease them so that your life will have good favor. Now you think about this. You walk out of the Church of Christ in Singapore, and what do you smell? Incense. Matter of fact, you can just see it flowing out of the top of the building. You hear all the different noises that they make, and you can even hear the change as they throw it in the money pot. That's where we're talking about. Here's the Lima Pen congregation, and we're going to go through this one also as rapidly. And here's what's impressive about Lima Pen. You can put that building maybe in here 4 times, just this room. And there are 180 people there. Now watch this. This is where I was sitting. If you notice in the top of the screen, there's a screen there. Because of the way their building is and because of what the government says, they can't alter their building. They can't change a wall. They can't add a wall. They can't remove a wall. They can't go up. They can't expand. They're done. That's all they can do. They can take their building and leave the land if they want to. But there's not a lot of land in Singapore. They're completely surrounded by water. So where I was sitting was right here in near the podium area. So as I turn my head right, here's the podium area. As you keep on going right, here are people. But notice this. See these glass windows here? There are people behind them. They can't take that wall down. They can't do that. You keep on looking behind the building and you'll see more curtains. There was a children's class going on at this time in the back area. They can't change their building. They can't alter it. They can't do anything. They're actually considering splitting up, starting another congregation. Because they're now at the point where they can't go anywhere. They can't grow. They can't fit another person in the building. You think about those problems. What do we do over here when we're out of space? We build on. They don't have that option. Same thing with Jurong. That building is the way it is. They don't own the land. When the government decides they've used the land well enough, they have to take their building and leave. Now, how are you going to do that? You're not. It's impossible. But right now, that's not a problem that they're looking at facing. And then this is the Commonwealth congregation. This is in the Philippines. And let me see if I've got another one here. Yeah. This particular group, and what's impressive about this photo, this was a Thursday during the day. They took off work to come to Bible study for 5 hours.
We can do that here, we'd be quiet.
They took off work to come to Bible study for 5 hours on a Thursday. Now, I want to ask you a question, and I don't mean this to be rude, but would that happen in America?
Never.
I don't think it would either. Here's the group that studied, I believe, I forgot what night this was. Time is different over there, so I don't remember what day this was, but this is the preacher's son here. The preacher is right here in the green. That's his daughter Iris right there, and let me see if I can find his wife in this photo. I can't find her in that photo, but this is the group that we're going to be talking about at the end of the presentation. Now, you remember this group right here. This is also the group, if you remember, I was telling you about a lady who I was hoping to study with, of whom we had been messaging all year, of whom said she was going to be there. She was not. I found out later that she has decided to make some life choices that are unfavorable. So that's where sometimes you find yourself in existence. Here's the Four Seas College. The Four Seas College is a group. This is the photo of everyone who was at, or at least for this day, of the Four Seas lectureship. Now, they take attendance indifferently. We take attendance based on how many bodies are there. They take attendance based on how many continents are represented. That's the importance of the Four Seas School. The Four Seas School is one of the only places in Asia. There are a few other schools in Asia. Don't let me make it like it's the only one. But it is one of the largest schools in Asia where people can come, study the Bible, and then go back home. That doesn't exist over there very much. So you've got people from the Philippines, and we'll talk about this in a minute. You've got people from China. You've got people from Japan. You have people from Vietnam. And they're all flooding in, and then they all go back home.
What about the rest of you, the Pacific Islands?
All of those islands. Anything in the area of Asia, they will come to this 1 week because they know during this week they can get what they need. And then they go back and they teach it to the rest of the congregation. Let me ask you this. This is kind of a rhetorical question, I guess a question that doesn't really need to be answered. But would we take a week of our lives, go somewhere else, spend 6-7 hours a day studying, and then go back home and teach it to the congregation? That's how fertile this area of work is. You see, you're not going to find that here, will you? It's rare. It happens. I don't want to make it sound like it doesn't. But they'll travel to the end of the world for this. We'll talk about that as we get to the value. Here's the school. As you go to the school, this is what the lectureship looks like. The students will have to present a chapel sermon. They have to do the entirety of the chapel area, the singing, the prayers, and everything else. But this was one of the students that was actually graduating, and he's going back to the southern area of the Philippines. I believe they had 4 students from the Philippines graduate this year. But what they had to do is they had to write their entire outline on the board, and then they gave their lesson facing you, all by memory. So they do this, and during the chapel, this is Billy Bland. There are, I forgot how many lessons presented. There is a lectureship book from the Four Seas College that will be in our library. There was one from last year, and there's one from this year that you can go look at. But the lectures take place all day, and here's something I wanted you to notice with this photo. They're there. They're there. They took the time to travel from all over the world and study. Inside of this particular lectureship, they do something that's fun, and I got to experience this fun this year. They have an open forum. And basically what that is that's a time for the entire area of Asia to ask questions. And they'll write them down on little sheets of paper and hand them in. Some of them will be short little questions, like explain so-and-so passage, and then you'll do that. One of the questions, should we celebrate Christmas? Now, when I read the question, I thought, well, that's odd. But you think about that, should we? We'll talk about that eventually. Other questions. There's a question that shows up every year. What do you think it is? I think it could show up on every open forum that ever exists every year. What do you think it is? One question that everybody probably asks. No takers?
Well, if you don't know, we'd be answering if we
Explain Matthew 19:9. Every year. It was on last year's open forum twice, and it showed up on paper 3 times this year. You want to know why they have a problem with that question? Us, America. You want to know why they have a problem with that question? America. How divided is the Church of Christ in America on Matthew 19:9? You don't realize that until you start talking to people. And they start saying, well, so-and-so says, and then so-and-so says, and guess where those so-and-so live? There are some people in Nashville, Arkansas, and I believe Oklahoma that are trying to take into the Philippines the AD 70 doctrine. In other words, Jesus returned in AD 70 and that's it. It's false. Our own brethren. There are people in the Nashville, and I'm forgetting the other state now, of which I learned while I was over there, who are taking the doctrine of grace only in the churches of Christ to the Philippines. What do you mean by that? They mean, don't worry about baptism, you only worry about grace. What's the problem with that? Goes against this book, doesn't it? Our own country and our own brethren are causing problems. That saddens me to a degree. But every year at the lectureship, as you move through this, you've got a great group of people. I want to introduce you to some people. On your far left is Peter Chin. Peter Chin is the director or the president of the college. His wife, Pui Fun Chin, is the executive secretary and the librarian of the college. Then I want to mention this guy. This is Eddie E. He was one of the very first converts of Ira Rice. You can go to the library. There are actually books written of the life of Ira Rice. And Eddie E. is one of the very first converts of Ira Rice. Matter of fact, the 4C school in the, I believe, 3 locations it has been in Singapore was a work that was started by Ira Rice. So you can see the history of this school. And this is Eddie E., but I want to mention him to you for a very specific reason. While we were there, he had to go to the hospital. And before we left, he was still in the hospital. And I don't know what his condition is at this time, but he was bleeding internally somewhere, and they could not figure that out as we were there. The next fella on the far right of the screen is Robbie Andrews. He is an American. He was a doctor. He was a doctor in the military, then practiced privately later on in his life. He recently, in the last few years, went to the Memphis School of Preaching, and Billy Bland and the 4C school said, hey, we need you to come over to Singapore. So guess what they did? They sold everything they had, and they moved to Singapore to help the 4C school. He's going to be returning back to the States, I believe, in January. I want to show you the students. This way you can see what the school is doing. Here is Elsie. She was a graduate. I believe she's going back to Vietnam, if I remember. Here's James Menendez. He was one of the ones, I believe he was the one in the photo speaking in chapel a few moments ago. And we're going to go through these a little bit quickly because I want you to see something. Notice the flag for the student, and then notice in the background the writing. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Here's Jerusalem. He's a very fine fellow. And then I'm going to stop at the last one here when I get to her. Here's Jessica Pat. She's from Commonwealth, the congregation in the Philippines. She was there in the Philippines last year while I was there. Went to 4C school after I had left. And now when I got back this year to Singapore, guess who was at 4C school? Jessica Pat, a familiar face. But I want you to notice this. This is their standard language. Guess what language they have to do everything in? English. Singapore is a country that primarily speaks English. Matter of fact, the entire area of Asia is quickly becoming a very large English-speaking people. Parents of young children are having their children take online classes taught from the United States so their children can learn how to speak English. In the Philippines, you can go to the Philippines, and primarily you can get along just by speaking English. Now, it's a little rough. That's why I don't take a taxi anywhere I need to go. One of the reasons, because you ain't going to get there if you can't describe where you need to go. But a lot of these places are starting to speak English. So look at these students. They spend time, here's a fellow from India. They spend time not only learning everything they need in English, but they have to learn before they leave that school how to do everything in English. So add 2 full years of Bible college and an English degree to it. Now that's the 4C school and what they're doing as they go through all the things that they do. And here were the current students that were leaving this year. Of course, you see Eddie E. sitting there on the left. You see Peter Chin, Billy Bland, Robbie Andrews, and then Pui Fun there, and the students lined up behind them. 2 of the students were considered wraparound students, so they graduated, they got their diploma, then they took their diplomas from them. They've got another 2 months to go, so they'll have to go back to school. I want to talk to you about the value as we start rounding the end of this out. Several people asked me, is this worth it? And you know, the quick answer is yes. Quick answer is yes, but I'm not giving you the quick answer because I want you to fall in love with this work as much as I have. And the only way you can do that is to see why it's valuable. Add the fact that, number one, you can work with congregations who need help. You can work with congregations that need help. Only 2 of the congregations that we work with in this area, there are a couple of others that we work with. One was the Lavender congregation, which we didn't talk about this year because I did not actually go to that physical location this year. And there are about 4 or 5 other congregations in the Philippines that I did not go to, but there are congregations that work with. Matter of fact, when we go in the Philippines and we go to the Commonwealth congregation, all these other preachers are going to come. They're going to find ways to get there. They're going to do what they have to do to get there. So there's a lot of need involved in that, in just the idea of the values here. Number 2, there's the 4C school. There's the 4C school. To be able to speak in one location and touch every area of Asia is not possible here. It's not possible here. But in that particular area, you can go, work, study with individuals, and you know that it's going to go back out and be preached hundreds of times over again. There's a lot of value in that. You can't do that anywhere, quite possibly anywhere else. So I want to give you some more value. I want you to see these faces because I see these faces every day. This little girl, if you remember last year during my report, was the little girl that was holding the book pointing at my picture because she saw me. She's a year older now, and now she's much bigger, and she remembered me. I want to show you this little girl. She was a newer little girl. She was just a tiny little baby last year. But guess what? She's one of the ones that runs around the building, wide open. Let me show you another little image here. This little fella had never seen a beard before and was impressed. This is at the Lima Penn congregation. The first 2 were at Jurong. This is at the Lima Penn congregation. And then I want you to see these young people in Commonwealth in the Philippines. If you focus in on the bottom left, these are the preacher's children there. And then you see the individuals on the right, all younger people. Now, when I said they took off work, I mean younger people took off work, 20s, 30s, and 40s. They took off work because it was a spiritual matter. There's a lot of value in that. And let me tell you, that's a lesson that you can't learn. That's a lesson you have to see. I can't tell you how important it is to spend time studying the gospel, but it's impressive that these people can show us that everything that we can give is worth it. I mean, if we're thinking about what's happening here, these people and we are investing in eternity. You see, we usually see life as what we're doing here and here alone and what we're doing here, and sometimes we get bogged down with what's going on. We're back to the Geron congregation, so we're kind of jumping all around the place as we're here. What do you think's taking place right here? Someone's getting ready to be baptized. They do theirs a little bit different than we do. Nothing wrong with that. But before they go down into the baptistry water, they take the confession so everyone can hear as loud as possible that this person wants to be a child of God. And then, of course, you know what they do next. So this was at Jurong. This was at the Limai Pen congregation in part of the Chinese-speaking group. You see the man right here on the left of your screen. This is John Grubb. You may be familiar with his name, and hopefully one year I hope he can speak on our lectureship for us. But John Grubb is a man who decided that he wanted to do mission work. So guess what? He flew to the other side of the world, spent 2 years learning how to speak Mandarin and Chinese. And now he goes all through this area of the world teaching the gospel. Dedication. Dedication. That's the value of this, because look what happens. You keep on going through this. This was a tub. I forgot what city this was in, but as we're all in this trip, there were about 10 or so Americans on this one trip. Maybe it was around 8. I may have my numbers wrong there. You know Jim and Janice Dearman? They were with us. They actually lived in Malaysia for many years. Of course, Billy Bland, Tim Burrows, Tim Hayes, myself, John Grubb, and there were a few others while we were there. But in this trip that we all split off, so I can't remember where this was, but it was in a Chinese-speaking area where John Grubb was. As you keep on going through the presentation, you're going to keep seeing people who want to turn to the Lord. There's a lot of value in that, isn't there? A lot of value in that. And you can see them as they come from that water, and you can see them in other areas. John Grubb also goes into some areas of which do not have baptistries. So you've got to find a scenario like you find inside of Scripture where much water was. And then you go out into the much water and you baptize.
That looks like the Yangtze River.
There's a lot of things going on over there.
Is there no government interference at all?
Singapore is an interesting city. Singapore wants no problems with anyone. Right now, there's no government problems. Singapore recognizes the churches of Christ in Singapore. They have no problems with them. They have no future issues with them. Evangelism's not a problem. The one thing you've got to remember in Asia and in this area of the world, the Islam reach is much higher than here. We don't really have that problem, do we, right here locally? So that's not something we've really thought about. But when you go into the Philippines, there's a major Muslim influence. When you go into Singapore, there's a major Muslim influence. And there's something you've got to remember. You don't talk to those people. In Malaysia, the churches of Christ are required to put on the front of their building, no Islam. In other words, to inform someone who is a Muslim that they should not go into this building because they're going to be taught the gospel. Singapore is a city that's filled with a Muslim influence. Not to the effect that you would imagine, but they catered to that in the fact that the hotel we stayed in, there's a little arrow in your hotel room pointing to a certain direction. The entire meal set was halal certified. In other words, there's not going to be any meat that they cannot eat. So Singapore is a very strict city, but at the same time, they are a very tolerant city. But here's the difference. If Islam or any other religious body acts up, they're going to shut it down, and they're going to force it out. I know when you say the word Islam, that kind of makes us cringe a little bit, doesn't it? It makes us worry. It makes us concerned about what's going on. It makes us think that we don't know what's going to quite take place. But this particular city is very, I would call it an ethnic city. People from every different, you've got people from India, you've got people from every area of Asia in this particular city. So as of right now, there is no government interference in what the church is doing. However, there are no radio programs and there are no TV programs. Those are illegal because the government does not want a problem. The government does not want one religious body teaching something else different and thus causing a problem. So they do not allow that on radio or television in that particular area of the world. Now, in the Philippines,
Not even in a private home?
not on television, not on the public television, not on the public radio. That's something you can't do. You can teach in private homes all you want to. You're open to do anything you want. There are certain restrictions for everyone, all across the board. In the Philippines is an entire different area. The Philippines is open to anything. If you want to do it, you can probably find somewhere to do so in the Philippines. There's a reason I stay at the hotel I stay at. An American missionary by the name of Tim Wilkes. He and his son do an absolutely tremendous amount of work in the entirety of the Philippines. So before I went there last year, I contacted them and said, hey, where do you stay? So when he changes places to stay, when he finds something better, we can kind of communicate about that and learn those things. I'm not going into this blind. The last thing I'm going to do is go into a city like the Philippines blind, because I'll tell you something. If you want to disappear or you want somebody to disappear, there's your place.
There's over 100 islands in that country.
There are many islands in this particular area. Remember James Menendez, the student from the Four Seas? He actually lives, if I'm correct, on the southern islands of the Philippines. So this is a way of life. This is every day. For me, it's 3 weeks, 20 days. And really, you take out 2 days on the front and 2 days on the end for travel. It's not 20 days. This is their everyday life. And I don't want you to forget pictures like this. Because is it worth it? The answer is yes. I don't want you to forget pictures as we're thinking about this. I don't want you to forget pictures like this. Because the future is there. Singapore, and actually, this is interestingly enough, China. This has not been said about China in many years. China is now encouraging their families to have more than one children. Singapore is encouraging their families to have more than one children. Singapore's never restricted parents, but they're now encouraging their younger families to have more children. Actually, while I was there, Singapore had a gigantic baby fair. We have those in this area of the world sometimes, but they have them even larger. And matter of fact, one of the nice couples at the Jerome congregation, Kelvin and Shawn, were about 2 weeks behind Kelly in the pregnancy. So it's going to be interesting to watch that happen from the other side of the world. So you've got a group of people now in countries who've never done this, encouraging their people, have more children. So the future's bright for this area, especially when you think about 4Cs and the work that they can do. And matter of fact, 4Cs is a part of what we support every year. When Billy Bland is here in October, we send him a check every year, and that supports the 4Cs College. So we're invested inside the 4Cs College every year in a large way. And I don't want you to forget images like this, but I want you to think about the value of what it means to bring someone to Christ. What would we pay? Now, I know that's a very hypothetical statement, so don't make Jonathan say something he's not. But what's the value on a soul? Yeah, can't put a price on it, can you? So when you look at images like this, and you can see things taking place, what's the value? Is it worth it?
Save souls, yes.
I tell you, it's hard. I have no fear of telling you it's hard. I went into the Philippines by myself this year, and I tell you that was the worst flight in, not because it was a bad flight, because I was alone. And when I got off that plane, I was it. And when I walked to the car that I had paid for, I was it. It's hard. Difficult. That's non-describable. It's hard to be away from your family for 3 weeks. That's hard. In the Philippines, maybe 50%. It's hit or miss. They're working on that. All their children are taking English. So it's hit or miss there. But I want to talk to you about the future. I wish there was a photo. I didn't get to get it in here this morning about the Commonwealth building, but I'm going to take you back to last year for just a minute. And I want to take you to the area of the Philippines. And all right, here are all of the areas of Metro Manila. Okay. I was in the red area. That's Quezon City. That's the area I stayed in. That's the area that the congregation was in. So look how large of an area this is. This is Metro Manila. Millions and millions of people living on top of each other. So I want you to think about this, and this is where the Commonwealth congregation is. I want you to see this. This is April 2008, Commonwealth. They were at a different location at the time, and that's actually how they received their name. They were on Commonwealth Road, so they were the Commonwealth Church of Christ. They had to move. They lost their lease, so they had to move to another building. And thankfully, a family of the preacher had another home that the preacher was able to purchase, and that's what they've actually turned into the church building here in Commonwealth. So this was June of 2012. So notice the difference in size. And they're retaining that same size as they continue to grow. I'm going to pick up a project this year. We need to raise $80,000. And I have a reason. They need a new building. They need a new building. Every year they've moved, they've grown. And I'll guarantee you they'll do it again.
How much is the price of land down there?
Don't know. Let me move to this particular area. So I'm going to be sending out some letters this year. It's going to be my goal in the next 12 months to raise $80,000. They have half the money they need to build this building. And they're going to build it right where it's at. The current building will be torn down, and a new building will be put up. The current building they're in needs a lot of work. They're out of space. They actually had to build an extra wing on the building so that they could fit everyone for services. And they have a plan for their building. They'll have to rent a space while that's part of the cost of what we're trying to do with these people. So I'm not asking you to give $80,000. But I am going to start a process. I'm actually going to go speak with some people in Memphis, someone who has raised more money in the Brotherhood than anyone else I know. Unfortunately, that was Garland Elkins, and he has passed away. But his wife, Corinne, was his right hand all the way through the process, and she knows how to do it. So I'm going to go speak with her quite soon so I can start doing this. And here's why I'm doing it. I'm confident if they have the space, they'll fill it. I can't say that for America, can you? But I'm confident in this area of the world that they have the space, they can fill it. So I have a future plan for what I'm doing. I don't know what my future holds about going back. That's yet to be determined. But I do have a project that I'm going to start this year, and I want you to pray for that. We'll talk about this more as we go through the year. We'll talk about probably this trip more. If you have any other questions, let me know. I know we're out of time this morning. I hear some children behind me. I think the final bell has already gone off. But I find this to be valuable, and I hope you do too. And I hope you know why I find this valuable. I think the future of what we can do is there. I'm not saying we stop evangelistic efforts here. As a matter of fact, I think they've taught us this morning that this building should be full, and that we should be working every day to fill this building in every way. As a matter of fact, over the next 6 weeks, we're going to release 2 different things that you can help us do to help put more people in this building. Not for numbers, for souls. That's what's important. So,
When peace like a river